Hi, Blair.
Hey, John.
So I was hoping that today we could talk about emotional intelligence and how mind models improve emotional intelligence. You and I have had some conversations, and we've agreed that emotional intelligence just seems to improve naturally with the use of mind models. But with this groundbreaking book, Daniel Goleman started a revolution, and he identifies 5 different areas of emotional intelligence. And I was hoping that we
Yes.
could dive into those. And then there's a further book. I don't have the great picture of the book right here, but Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Travis Bradbury and a lady wrote that together. And they've done a lot of research about how emotional intelligence operates in the workplace, and go so far as to say that they've been able to document that a 1% increase in emotional intelligence translates to a $1,300 increase in salary across
Absolutely.
all groups of people, different levels within organizations and around the world. So it's they found it to be very consistent in their research. So it seems like a really interesting and effective topic to talk about.
Absolutely. It is. And it is fascinating as well, frankly. So, I mean, back in the day, when I got started, geez, this is going to date me, but I guess my beard dates me enough already. So, back in the day, may the force be with you, Star Wars. And I found studying life skills, and that's in my background, life skills college. I was vice president, then president. I worked my way up the ranks of training from coach to trainer to master trainer. 7 years of research and well, 17 and a half actually, but recognizing the power of emotions is critical in that area. And so that whole thing of may the force be with you came down to feeling emotions and
Mhm.
feeling the effectiveness of being able to identify your own feelings to start off with, but also help others identify theirs.
Okay.
So just as a little tip, one of the things that I try and get managers to do occasionally when it's appropriate, I get them to help their employees out, their subordinates out, by actually teaching them how to describe feelings. And it's an exercise that I teach in Mind Model Method Coach training, and it's called just simply describing feelings. But it's
Mhm.
way more complex than that because we all have way more than one feeling at one time. And being able to put names and labels, words to describe those feelings is key. And when you can compare that and pair it to behaviors that you see other people doing
Mhm.
and do that, identifiably, identify it, like all the 3 things that we do in results now, which is always identify, repeat, and duplicate. So if you can identify it, name and label that feeling, get it approximately correct, repeat it so that you're seeing that impact on multiple people's faces multiple times and over multiple experiences, and being able to duplicate that over and over again and help your employees see their emotions, feel their emotions, connect with them. All of a sudden you get this this growth in EQ at a corporate, um, at least a department level, and it tends to spread. In fact, so much so that when I went and created a model of how to do corporate engineering,
Mhm.
one of the key elements in there was teaching senior leadership describing feelings so they could be aware of their own emotions and help their employees describe their emotions. And what happened when you paired that with being more effective and less judgmental, what happened was people were able to move up the ladder far quicker and ascend to higher heights, and engage more effectively. Engagement numbers would go up. across the board with all the people that we were training in this. And that was huge. So we'd get an increase of from 30, 40 points of engagement, from barely 50% engagement to 70, 80%, sometimes more and sometimes lower, to 70 to 80%, even 90% engagement factor from their subordinates. So when you do a 360 review on engagement, it's actually staggering. So that research that you're quoting there is not surprising to me at all when you see how emotional intelligence can transform, both yourself, but others when you can engage like that. It's huge. And so I've used it a lot over the years. And a lot of the mind models are, in fact, I would dare to say all of the mind models have some factor of emotional intelligence.
I would think so, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so you've done a very nice job of introducing the touching on most of the 5 domains that Mr. Goleman identified in his book of emotional intelligence, which is called either EQ or EI today. Can we go through those? Can I run through those 5 and then we take them one at a time and see?
Yeah,
so self-awareness of emotions. That is recognizing a feeling as it happens. So you talked about that in terms of describing feelings. Then managing our own emotions, how we handle our feelings so that they're appropriate. Motivating oneself, maintaining our focus, getting curious, getting creative. So creativity, I think we want to definitely touch on that. Recognizing emotions in others, that sense of empathy, or the skill of empathy. And then handling relationships, which is managing relationships with others. And that's where you were talking about, then training the managers to do that. And it seemed like it just kind of completed the circle.
Well, that's what we found, when we're working with lifting and elevating people around us. How do you do that in a predictable fashion? You can't do it with raw information, because how somebody feels determines how they perceive the effectiveness of what they're doing. Now, there's some weird pieces. That I created links. Let's go back to the first point.
Okay, the first one, self-awareness of emotions. So recognizing a feeling as it happens.
Exactly. I wanted to go there because, literally, what we were doing with that describing feelings was getting the individual, generally a manager or a senior manager, sometimes the owner of the company, to start recognizing their emotions, how they felt. And if they're going into frustration, into stuck, into irritability, all those negative emotions, then do they look for blame? And if they're looking for blame, all of a sudden, everything goes outside of them and they lose the ability to have self-moderate, basically self-control, self-moderate. What it winds up doing is they're looking for others to be the target of their problem. Who caused it? Where does it have to get fixed? All of that. But if we look at both creativity and, as you correctly sort of accidentally paired with that, was curiosity. I find a huge pairing between curiosity and creativity, by the way. It just, they go hand in glove. So it's such a tight fit. So curiosity and creativity, in order to be creative, you have to be curious. But the funny thing here is that curiosity, when we're in that stuck state of wanting to blame somebody else or take it out on somebody else or finding an external source of the problem as opposed to solving the problem, usually when we find an external source or identify it as the source of the problem, rarely does that actually prove out to be the full story.
Mhm.
So it's how people interpret that problem. Unless it's physical, if it's like something blew up and we have to fix it, well, it's external. I mean, it's just that. But there is a component that is, how did it break? How did that happen? What else was missing? And if you don't have that internalized curiosity to ask that deeper level question and to sort that through with curiosity and creativity, you don't get where you need to go as quickly. It takes much, much longer, like 3, 5, 10 times as long, sometimes literally parking companies in stuck states for years. And
Wow.
these are the things that I used in my coaching and consulting practice to be able to shift companies by getting them engaged in a construct of curiosity leading to creativity, but knowing where to get it started, getting it grounded. So it gets people out of that judgment phase into an evaluation.
Okay.
And that state change is huge because you can feel evaluative. You also feel judgmental, like you're judging the situation. But judgments generally go negative, whereas evaluations look for external things that I can change.
Mhm.
So when I put that into place, I look at it not as necessarily I need to change the person, but I need to change the process. And it almost always is, not always. Sometimes we have the wrong people in the wrong seats on the bus. Okay. And sometimes people have to move off the bus, but rarely, in my experience, if you work with them to create curiosity and creativity and get them engaged in a non-threatening environment where they are not at, fearing job loss and everything else, they're wanting to get creative and solve a problem,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden their curiosity gets going, their creativity gets going, and they solve problems more effectively. Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, everybody who's employed has to have some part of their job is a
Solve.
problem for somebody else,
Okay.
and they have to solve it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what
So
they get
if we
paid.
go back to ground zero again, self-awareness and recognizing a feeling as it happens. So what's
Yes.
seems like there's a a tipping point here where I look at it as, if I don't recognize it as it happens, then it has kind of gotten out ahead of me, and now I'm being swept up in this emotion or this feeling, and it's almost a sense of chasing rather than and reacting rather than recognizing and identifying. So what's the key there, or the trick?
Okay, well, you actually said what that was. I don't think you heard yourself, but I'm going to. The what is the key? Because in the research that I did, I mean, most people do not recognize that there are two types of emotions. The same emotion can be processed two different ways in your brain. So one can be a why-based emotion, which invariably leads to judgment and lack of curiosity and blame, to
Mhm.
attribute the blame to somebody. Now, some people believe that you should attribute blame, but in business, lawyers want to attribute blame, but that just costs the person money, when you attribute blame. So, hey, if you're going to flip it around and make money and be an entrepreneur, it's not about a blame game here. It's about a curiosity and creativity game.
Mhm.
That's the game that needs to be played. And that's with what happened? Not why did that happen, but what happened? The next part is what happened and what might I do about that now? When I get to that level, then I can start saying, what did I feel, as opposed to why did I feel that? Why did that have to happen to cause me this pain, this discomfort, this
Yeah.
loss?
And that's a defensive stance that leaves us, in especially in a group situation, now it's all of a sudden us against them, or me against them, or me against that person. And
now you have a confrontation.
yeah.
Now, the funny thing is that confrontation can actually be internal too. So you can have a conflict. Why did I do that? God, I'm so stupid. Like, really, I got to think this through differently. Come on, like, let's do it. Let's get after it. Let's figure this out. But why did I do that in the first place? Like, how many times have you done that?
Oh,
Like,
there's no way.
like countless.
Yeah,
Yeah, so high, it's not worth counting, and that's most people. That's how come there's these two types of emotions.
Well, you have so neatly transitioned right into that second domain, which was the managing emotions, handling feelings so they're appropriate. The additional description that he gave in there was examples of self-soothing, or shaking off uncontrolled anxiety, or self-judgment. So again, that's what you were saying about what versus why, that's a form of self-soothing. Because if I'm curious and I say, what am I feeling and what caused me to feel that way, that's just not beating myself up. That's the opposite of self-judgment. And so then I'm staying in an appropriate management of my feelings, probably less likely to overreact in a situation against someone else because of that defensiveness that comes out of the self-judgment. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And just to add briefly to that, self-soothing is a concept that I've seen. I know it exists, but self-soothing is a psychological descriptor that does not really, it tends to lead to a suppression of emotion.
Oh, okay.
Not utilization of emotion. So that was one of the issues that I had back in the day at Life Skills College. A lot of our people, like 80% of our people, were potentially suicidal. So this self-soothing behavior worked really well to cause them to suppress their desire to harm themselves. However, it didn't break them out of their pattern. So it temporarily delayed it. And so the self-soothing, puts people on a path of causing a delay in behavior and stops them from being effective. But if you flip it into creativity, and you flip that creativity to the precursor, which is curiosity, and you get curious and see what's possible, all of a sudden, the self-soothing paired with curiosity flips into creativity quickly.
Okay.
People who zoom ahead in businesses do this subconsciously all the time. So they go, it's okay. I'm okay. It's okay. We'll figure it out. The second they get to we'll figure it out means they're being curious. So that behavior of it's okay is self-soothing. This de-escalates that emotion. And when we get to we'll figure it out, it actively fires curiosity in the back of your head of going, okay, now that I've said we'll figure it out, how can I figure this out? Well, all of a sudden you're behaving, you're using your behavioral intelligence at a subconscious level to change a behavior so that you move forward into your curiosity.
And there we're in step number 3, or the domain number 3, which is motivating oneself through maintaining focus and getting creative.
Isn't this fascinating how this all tends to flow? What we do is we have the mind models. I mean, I just want to do a quick reiteration here. So what we've done is we've gone from a stuck state where somebody is stuck and frustrated and probably into judgment, and they're loading up the judgment either with themselves or towards somebody else, but they personally are feeling all of that. They just are behaving in that way Now you name and label it, and you identify what's going on for you. But if you do it in a what, not a why, you stop the blame game almost in its tracks, because you might have caught yourself going into blaming and going, well, that's not very effective. So I want to, what might I do differently? It's a what. It's not why might I do this differently. It's what might I do differently. So all of a sudden we clarify that and we get to the state where we've taken it out. And all of these are mind models. So, we use the question concepts, which is all about how to listen to your own mind or others in real time, listening for your processing channel in your brain. Are you using a what to process, or are you using a why? If you're using a what, you're probably going to be okay. If you're using a why, you're probably going to get stuck and want to blame other people and get frustrated, and you're going to burn a few hours of time at the very least. Now, flipping that around into moving forward, you want to be able to transition. So we go from the whole thing about getting curious and getting creative, and I've gone through that enough, but that, curiosity is a mind model in and of itself of how to use it, how to do that. Creativity is a byproduct of using curiosity, is what I found, as opposed to most people treat it as a skill set in and of itself. But without you being curious, you're not going to get creative. So that's how come I put them like, what is the root cause? And that's one of the things you're going to find about mind models, is that the research has been done to root cause these things. What causes these to work?
And we're really to key question right there about root cause. I just want to, since you brought it up.
Yeah.
Root cause analysis using what caused this to work is so much more effective than the 5 whys that's commonly taught.
I have been in a business that brought in experts at a $250,000 pop twice to do the 5 whys. I came into that company and put them through the question concepts and a few other mind models like clarity versus certainty. And that's where one of the mind models that was just on
ask versus tell, I'm sure.
Ask versus tell, you got it. And we could go through a litany of them, like safety versus comfort, ask versus tell, the question concepts, clarity versus certainty, judgment versus evaluation, external versus internal.
We've got this little stack called the super stack that has about 8 of those in there that are really effective together.
Yes, and we can rattle those off, but the point here is the mind models are here and can be used interchangeably to get down to that root cause, to recognize how behaviors form in people, not because of their belief, but because of how they're thinking. And so the core piece is always in mind models is how you think. And we teach you the mind models so you can take the mind models, and it's almost like a utility belt, like you're Batman with this stuff, and you whip out the right mind model at the time, and all of a sudden things just get better. Like that's what tends to happen.
Put the Joker back in his cage.
Exactly. Literally, because the Joker is almost always why. And so that changes everything. And people are so used to dealing with whys in their life that they put themselves into stuck states, not realizing that they had any influence over that whole thing. They blame it on everybody else because that's what whys do. Points the blame out externally, not internally. No ability to control, not even really much to influence. So it becomes problematic at that point in time.
And now you're right into number 4, which is recognizing emotions in others.
And that's huge.
Empathy. So what mind models, either that we've talked about, or how will mind models help us with empathy and recognizing in others? And does it need to start with recognizing what we're feeling and using a what concept first?
You know what? It's a great place to always start with where you are, so that you can start with a clear head. or at least a head that's clearly identified as to where you are. So if you're frustrated, you know that you're frustrated. Okay, I'm going into this, I'm frustrated. But making my frustration worse and blaming others might give me a modicum of relief, and it can be self-soothing. However, it almost always leads to immediate explosions or near immediate explosions, because somebody is being blamed and they'll either go into an explosive mode or they'll go into a repressive mode. And frequently in business, they repress. So it just stacks up, and they, subliminal or subconsciously start sabotaging, both either self-sabotage or sabotaging the process, or not passing on information. And if your business or organization has a ton of politics going on, I guarantee you there's a ton of whys in the background. So you're bleeding off energy. And that energy that could have gone towards producing products, services, results, bottom line. I mean, one of my client companies, I went in there and dealt with a corporate culture of fear. And it was turning that whole corporate culture around by getting people out of that why-based emotion into what-based emotions, and teaching people how to be curious. By the way, that is one of the companies that I had the 5 whys, and they were so angry about why didn't this work after the team left. Well, it's because they didn't know the difference between a disguised question concept and an actual question concept. And neither did the team. And it cost them over well in excess of $500,000, because they brought that team in twice and burnt 2 years of time, because they brought them in 1 year, tried to get everything fixed. They brought them in for 3 months at $250,000. They thought they had it up and going, and within 3 months they were worse off than they were.
So the $500,000 was just the fees, and then the opportunity cost in that 2 years was probably unmeasurable, but higher.
A lot higher, yes, because in one afternoon with one manager walking him through a question concept of ask versus tell, it took 3 weeks, but working through this manager who was telling his team what he wanted done, and we need this assembly line fixed, and we got to get this done, and that's it. He was relatively new. The upshot of it, the repair and maintenance manager, who thought that because the manager's office was right next door to the order clerk's office for purchasing orders and issuing those, that he would obviously take care of it. Well, they never got the part in until I went out there and engaged with them, because Rob had been frustrated. He was frustrated, but he said, I don't have time to ask all these questions that you want to ask, Larry. I'm just going to tell him what to do. So he went out there, told him. I walked out there, 10 minutes out and back, and we were done, and I was coaching him in his office. Next week I went back. How's that program, or how's that repair going? It isn't repaired yet. I'm so frustrated. We're limping along. We're doing like blah, blah, blah. I got to go out there right now. Can I tag along again? He goes out there and yells at him for about 20 minutes and threatening people and doing everything else. And I come back week 3. Well, obviously nothing happened. And I said, Rob, okay, you tried twice. Let me do my questioning thing. Let's see how long this actually takes. So I went out there and I asked, and that's where I discovered the repair and maintenance manager's assumption.
Okay.
So he thought there was a budgetary restraint because nothing had happened. That was from the repair and maintenance manager's mouth. So he didn't know, he didn't ask. The whole thing was a corporate culture of not asking, just yelling and telling. That was basically it. And everybody was worried. Everybody saw the problem. Everybody did it. But I am the guy that didn't know anything about building concrete blocks, making them, or doing anything. And he says, you don't know anything about it. You're absolutely right. So that makes me the perfect person, because I have to ask them questions. I don't know, and they know I don't know. So they're going to tell me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went out there, and sure enough, 20 minutes of asking questions. In fact, 10 minutes in to the whole thing, the repair and maintenance manager gets up and says, excuse me, I have to go and order the part. You know,
problem became
because that
obvious.
part, that's right. When it became obvious that we needed an action taken, you know, it was there. And sure enough, within 4 days of my 20 minutes, the part was in, fixed, and the whole entire company was back up full tilt, full bore, because of one simple question concept.
Wow.
And utilizing it, but recognizing the emotional intelligence of driving the why and the fear of frustration. People got creative, got curious, and got engaged and did things quickly. And that was a huge learning lesson for Rob that he has shared many times. And that reminds me of his lesson with me as he went on to other things after getting the company up and going. And it got sold. And that was the thing, was to get it set up and get it going.
Okay.
Thing.
Position it for sale.
Yeah, because I was brought in to help clean it up, you know, and that sort of thing, because they tried everything else, spent a lot of money on it, and they were just squeaking by, you know, at the end of the day, just squeaking by.
Well, I wanted to pull back to one or return to one of the things that you said about bleeding energy, bleeding off energy in the company. And I think I know what you mean, but I had a mental image that came up as soon as you said that. And I'm thinking about the brakes on a car. You know, that's a process of friction, right? We intentionally create friction between the brake pad and the brake cylinder to create to slow the car down. And
Correct.
when you were talking about bleeding off energy, that's what I'm thinking. When people repress, when they, you know, because they're afraid for their job, they can't fight back. So they repress, and then they go into this subconscious or conscious sabotage. That's internal
Correct.
friction, right? You've got all this internal friction of these people not asking and whatever. And that's like putting on the brakes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you get people holding on to information when it should be passed along quickly. They hold on to it because this information is important for the company. And because it's important information, they hold on to it because I have that important chunk of information. Yes. So if I let go of it, I lose importance.
Okay. So it's a sense of importance and control.
They have to, because they're so out of control in so many areas, because they're not allowed to describe their feelings. Okay. Now, one of the things
now we're back to handling relationships, the fifth domain, handling relationships by managing emotions in others. So what do mind models help you do? I think you may have already described it, but in a company to help people improve their own emotional intelligence by managing relationships with others?
Well, number one, it gets into safety versus comfort. A lot of people do not understand that mind model. It sounds so simple. Well, and it sort of is, but it isn't, because people smush. It's a very technical term, tongue in cheek. It's smushing. Okay.
Yeah, I think the fancy term for that is conflate, but smushing is so much easier to understand.
Yes, let's just call it smushing. So they smush things together. And what they wind up doing is they take the idea of safety and they smush it with comfort. So when somebody feels uncomfortable, they perceive themselves as being unsafe. And when somebody perceives themselves as being unsafe as well, they also perceive themselves as being uncomfortable. And therefore, they're in a stuck state because you have to be uncomfortable in order to change. Like, okay, think of your favorite chair and you're sitting in it. Okay. And what do you tend to do? Do you want to get up and move?
Not really.
Or Not really. Yeah,
Might shift
it's
around a little bit, but mostly
that's
it's
about it.
a nice place to stay.
Exactly. And that's what people do. That's what comfort does to us. We want to be there in that comfortable state. Like, I forget which law it is, but an object at rest wants to stay at rest. An object in motion wants to be in motion. Well, a lot of people figured that, hey, if my steady state is being at rest or doing my job the way that I'm always used to doing it, then all of a sudden that's their comfort. That's their comfort zone.
Sure.
And so everything that they can do to maintain that comfort zone is what they do. And they think that that comfort zone creates safety for them.
So they're kind of equating that with survival.
You got it. Now, it's a false assumption,
Yeah.
but that's how they think about it, because usually in life that is true. However, rarely in business is that accurate, especially today. So we need to have creativity. Now, the really interesting thing is if you train up a team that is constantly curious, constantly striving, constantly going ahead, their area of comfort and safety is in change, not in steady state, not in being everything safe. So when they are not changing, they get scared. That is a great place for a company to be that is looking to innovate. A company that is not looking to innovate is just slowly, like trailing off and going nowhere fast. So you're not having growth. So growth requires change. It requires being flexible, adaptable, deliberate on change, and making it work and increasing curiosity. In order to make it work, you have to increase curiosity. So now the relationship change here is the relationship with safety versus comfort has to change in yourself and the team. And I would argue Elon Musk is one of the best people at doing this, either consciously or subconsciously. He's made very public statements and is quoted as being said, failure is an option here. In other words, if you're not failing fast, and we have one of the mind models called FAIL, first attempt in learning, and another one is fail fast, falling forward. In other words, make incremental failures and test things as best you can. But as you grow, it's going to still be incremental, but it's going to be a bigger, problem. And I mean, how did Elon Musk take a company, that almost went bankrupt, SpaceX, by the way, and Tesla again, yet he failed fast, falling forward, to be able to test the assumptions that he made to figure out which ones are actually effective and which ones aren't, which ones work and which ones aren't and don't. So you fail fast, falling forward. He's fired people for not being creative enough. He's fired people for not pushing the boundary enough and not failing, like just doing the safe thing. It isn't about safety. This is about pushing boundaries.
Well, and there's a distinction in there about, you talked about incremental and that, coming from having a habit myself of all or nothing tendency to think in terms of all or nothing, the size of the risk is what matters. Taking a little chance, risking $5 to learn a lesson is a whole different thing from pushing all your chips in. Or to use a
sometimes the next level of incremental change. You're right, but the next level, I mean, one of the famous stories about Elon Musk on the third or fourth launch to land a rocket, he put in all his chips because he was going to have to shut her down and the SpaceX would quit. But that was the next incremental change.
Okay.
So he had 3 failures before where the Falcon 9 blew up trying to land. And then the 4th one stuck. and they call it a suicide burn. And they call it a suicide burn because if it is not performed perfectly,
Mhm.
okay, think of a falling rocket, a falling stone or whatever, has to, in this case, a rocket, has to put out, time the burn,
Mhm.
so that it's when it gets to that hover point, it stops falling, is when the landing legs touch the ground.
Okay.
That's literally what they had to work out. They worked it out mathematically, but they had a tough time doing it practically, where it cost them 3 attempts. But on the 4th one, it worked perfectly. And almost, they've done well in excess of 100 landings now, where it's worked perfectly with 1 or 2 exceptions. But it's like a fraction of a percent failure rate compared to 75%, well, 100% failure rate until it became, that 25%, that last one stuck the landing. And from there, they learned exactly how to do it. They had all the variables needed to know how to make that happen. And that's what they do. They take failure as a learning opportunity, because that's what it is.
And
You
would that
cannot
be
learn
considered a
without failing.
really a sign of high emotional intelligence when you can do that?
It absolutely is, because you're not beating yourself up with a failure. You're actually learning from it very quickly, very durably. And it's an exciting time when that happens. So you view a failure not as a failure, but as a partial success, because that failure, that's one of the things that we do in Mind Model Method Coach training, is teach people how to break down what most people would call a failure, right up to like between something worked. And that's something that always worked is you made an attempt. That was one thing that worked. What else also worked? Well, there's probably lots, right up to 80-90% of everything that you did worked. And then it's this last 2 to 10%, 2 to 20% that didn't work, that caused it to go sideways. Well, fix that incrementally. What didn't work? But don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as, I just limited all of the things that I need to keep and don't need to fix. I just have these problems now to fix. So let's work on those and make sure that none of these variables that I'm fixing change these other things. And figure out a system to track. And then it will work. It will work always.
All right. So just to summarize, mind models, learning mind models, and practicing them, using them, increases your emotional intelligence. And based on the research that we've seen from Mr. Bradbury and his organization, learning a core group of mind models could easily increase your annual salary by $10,000 or more.
You're
That's
right.
a pretty
Well,
good use of time, in my opinion.
You know what? Over a 10-year period of working with my client companies, less than 10 of them, by the way, we collectively increased their top line performance by not going through the numbers, through the books and everything else, just by training them in mind models and increasing EQ as a byproduct. We increased their top line by $757 million, over $750 million in a 10-year period. And these are smallish businesses. All of them were less than 100 million. In fact, most of them were less than 40 million. So that's a lot of leverage going forward to lift and do that. Like it's stunning. It's amazing what is possible when you change how people think. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And mind models do that. And I don't have to do that. I just show you and you go, yeah, that works.
Oops.
That's the thing that is exciting when it takes off and it goes, because it just works more effectively. And people want to do what's more effective.
Yes, they do. I do.
Yes, most people do.
Right. Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating exploration into the overlap between mind models and emotional intelligence and the interaction and how mind models increase emotional intelligence. So
Absolutely.
forward to more.
Absolutely.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.